All right, for the jury.
You may be seated. You may be seated. Going forward now, out of respect for the jury, until you all are seated, we will stand for you. Well, thank you very much for all being back here and ready to go on time. Now, although you just sit down, I'm going to ask you all to stand with me. And if you would, please raise your right hand. Do each of you swear that you will render a true verdict based on the evidence and the law that you hear in this case? All right, you may be seated. You are all now part and official members of this proceeding. So we will expect you to follow those rules that I talked about earlier throughout the trial. In addition, now I see that you have notepads with you, and that is just fine. I find that it's helpful to put down notes, and I'll be doing the same up here throughout the trial. But one of the things I want to let you know right now is you will not be allowed to use those notes when you are deliberating. You might think, why, if we take notes, can't we use them? The reason is we don't want people that sometimes get back there and they go, well, look, my notes say this. And it's like, that's the transcript. That's exactly what happened. You all will collectively remember the evidence when you are back there. But you're allowed to have those now if just you want to jog your memory or write down some highlights. You are welcome to do that. What that also emphasizes is just how important it is that you listen carefully to the witness who is on the stand. And that's because you cannot just get a transcript later, not from your pad of what you think or from the court reporter, unless there are very limited conditions. And I will read those to you in the law. But even if you want to hear back from a witness, it will be a very limited amount when it meets all of these conditions. So the point of all that is to give all of your careful attention to the witness when that person is testifying. All right, the first thing we'll do is have the reading of the indictment. State, could you approach, please? Would the defendant please rise?
Cause number CR 20-1044C. The state of Texas versus Lincoln Anthony Pearson. In the name and by the authority of the state of Texas, the grand jury for Hays County, Texas, presents to the 274th District Court of Hays County, Texas, the following charge. On or about the 28th day of September 2019 in Hays County, Texas, the defendant, Lincoln Anthony Pearson, did then and there intentionally or knowingly cause the penetration of the female sexual organ of Carissa Ellis by the defendant's sexual organ without the consent of Carissa Ellis against the peace and dignity of the state, signed on November 4th, 2020 by the grand jury foreperson.
To that charge, how do you plead?
Not guilty, Your Honor.
Very well, you may be seated. State, are you ready to proceed with your opening statement?
Yes, Your Honor.
You may.
Thank you. Excuse me. Right. All right, thank you guys for your attention. I know that the judge selection is never a fun and exciting thing to keep you long. We're finally to the part of the trial where we tell you what is this case about. Well, I can tell you what it's not. It's not a he said, she said. That's not what we're here. There was never a question about whether or not Carissa Ellis wanted to have sex with this defendant. You're going to hear that this happened a while ago, September 28th, 2019. It's been a couple of years. But I think what you're going to hear from the witness stand is that they still remember it pretty well. Yes, there are some missing details. Yes, there are some maybe inconsistencies. But for the most part, they remember what happened. because this was a significant traumatic event. You're gonna hear that they were drinking alcohol. This was a day, beginning of semester, Carissa is new to Texas, she's made some friends, she's, played with her roommates, and they introduced her to Nick. And her and Nick are dating. They've been dating for less than a month. Things are great. They're super into each other. And on this day, September 28th, Nick invites his best friend to come hang out in San Marcos. And you're going to hear that the defendant came down for the day, that he met Carissa for the first time that day. They all went to brunch together. They're having a good time. They're drinking. They go back to Carissa's place. Nick does not live there. Carissa lives there with roommates. They go to the pool. It's a nice day out. That you're going to hear the boys probably didn't have swimsuits, but they went in the pool in their clothes, at least their bottoms. And then when they got out of the pool, the defendant's clothes went in the dryer. So now you have the defendant walking around Chris's apartment wearing a towel or blanket, something. You're going to hear that right before they got out of the pool, Carissa and Nick got into a little fight, a tiff. No one remembers what it was about. It wasn't significant. The reason it is significant to our story is because they kind of killed the mood. At that point, Carissa's friend Becca, who was there hanging out with them, decided to go home. They all decided to get out of the pool and go in. You're going to hear from Milan, one of the roommates, who came home from work right around that time, completely sober. Then Nick and Carissa go upstairs to her room. They close the door. Maybe they continue their argument. They don't even remember. But they pass out on Carissa's bed by themselves. You're going to hear that Milan knew the defendant from previous hangouts. She was also a very good friend of Nick. And so her and the defendant hang out. They have a couple shots. They talk a little bit. You're going to hear from Milan that the defendant was looking to get. He was asking her, do you have any friends? Do you want to be my wingman tonight on the square? He was looking. At some point, Milan decides, I'm tired, I've been at work all day, I'm gonna go take a nap. They walk upstairs. The defendant is still just wearing a towel, blanket. They open the door to Chris's room. And they don't really remember why they did that. And they see Nick and Chris sleeping on the bed. And the defendant runs and jumps on top of them. They don't wake up. They barely move. They are out. Whether it is tired, whether it is alcohol, whether it is all of the above, they are out. The defendant gets up, they leave the room, Milan goes into her room, closes the door. She locks the door. And you're going to hear from her that a little bit of time later, here comes the defendant knocking on her door. Hey, Milan. And she ignores him. She begins to be sleeping. And we don't know then what he does exactly in these next moments. Everyone thought he'd crash on the couch. Maybe play on his phone, who knows? What no one expected him to do was go get in bed with Nick and Chris. But that's the next thing you're going to hear, is that Milan is in her room playing on her phone, and she starts to hear yelling. And she thinks at first that Nick and Chris have woken up and started arguing. And very quickly she realizes, oh no, that is not what is happening. Carissa is screaming. And Milan comes out of her room, and Carissa is running down the stairs and out the front door, screaming of her own home. And Milan goes out to what's going on, what's happening, and asking her questions. You're going to hear from Nick, who was there in the bed, who was passed out, who didn't see or hear anything. That's one of those holes we talked about, evidence we would love to have. Is it for Nick to have seen or heard something? The first thing Nick woke up to was Carissa screaming and pulling on her clothes and running out of the room. And he starts asking, what's going on? And you're going to hear from Carissa. And she's going to tell you that she was sleeping, that she passed out in her bed with her boyfriend. And she woke up to her boyfriend's best friend that she had met for the first time that day on top of her and inside her. There was no flirting between them. There was no anything. There was no prior relationship. There was no reason for him to think that she was gonna be into that. And she never gave consent, expressed or apparent. You're gonna hear all that from her. You're gonna hear that after she ran out of her house screaming, she called her best friend Becca to come get her and take her to the hospital. And at the hospital, she just wanted an STD test. She's freaking out. She's in shock. And you're gonna hear that she declined to get a sex assault kit. She did not want an examination. And I think you're gonna hear, from the defense that, well, why wouldn't she do that? And you're gonna hear from Chris herself and from others in this field, it's very common. That victims don't want to go through that process, they don't want to get re-victimized by that process. And that Carissa believed because she really did it, there wouldn't be a reason to do the sexual assault. You're gonna hear from the officer she made her report to at the hospital about how her emotions were up and down, how she was clearly suffering the trauma. And you'll hear from Becca. She was there throughout the day. She has, evidence that Carissa and Nick were into each other, but Carissa was not into this defendant. And I think though, at the end of the day, from all the witnesses here, that there was no reason to believe there should be any relationship between Carissa and this defendant. And you'll hear from Detective Davidson. And you're going to hear, for whatever reason, we do not know, there was a delay. This happened in September. He finally got the case in January. We don't know. I have had him go back and search police records. Why this delay? What happened here? We don't know. And so by the time the detective got the case, Carissa has moved out of that apartment. She no longer lives there. There is no evidence to be collected. That at the time, they didn't have cameras in their house. They didn't have, pictures of what was going on in the room. There wasn't any evidence in that room. You're going to hear from Detective Davidson that, no, he didn't go back and collect bed clothes. You're going to hear from Sergeant Sparenberg, who took the report. No, I didn't go and collect her bedding. I didn't go and collect evidence. Because there wouldn't have been any value. Everyone said he was in that bed with them. By collecting her bed sheets, we would have proven he was in that bed with them. They wouldn't have told us the issue of consent, which I expect to be the main issue in this trial. There's no physical evidence that can answer that question for you. And I think you're gonna hear from the defense that she's just lying. These are just lies. Lies that she has repeated so often, she believes it was true. But I would submit to you, when someone has told the exact same story from the night it happened to 4 months later, to 5 years later, that's called consistency. That's not lies. And I'm going to ask you to look at the surrounding circumstances we're dealing with here that all support Carissa's story of what happened. Facts that we all agree on, that he was in the bed, uninvited, that she ran out of the house screaming. Who runs out of their own house screaming after a consensual act? So I want you to think of all of those things as you listen to the evidence in this case. I want you to keep your eyes open, your ears open, keep your mind open until the end. And that's what we all agreed to do this morning in jury selection, is to listen to the evidence. And at the end of the case, I think that you will find that we have proven this case beyond a reasonable doubt. And that you will find this man, Lincoln Pearson, guilty of sexual assault.
Vince, would you like to give an opening statement now or defer until later?
I would, Your Honor. I'd like to give one now.
You may.
You want this?
No, I think I need to.
Ask her.
Okay.
Is it on?
No. There we go. That's probably better, isn't it? Okay. The more you repeat something, the more you believe it. And I think what you'll hear through this trial, this is usually the part where we can give you a roadmap, what you'll expect to hear throughout this trial. what we expect the evidence and the testimony to be. And it's my expectation that at the end of this process, at the end of the testimony, at the end of the evidence, you will walk into that jury room gripped with the conviction that this table right here has not met their burden. Just plain and simple. That there is reasonable doubt, and there's a good reason for that. Lincoln Pearson did not commit the offense of sexual assault. And there's a good reason there's not evidence there to support that. Everyone you will hear, with the exception possibly of Milan, was extremely intoxicated that day. We're talking 2, 3, 4 in the afternoon. Extremely intoxicated. Not in a good mental space to recall really anything. You're going to hear that this group drank tons, pitchers and pitchers of mimosas at Craft House, that they stopped at a liquor store on the way back to the complainant's apartment, that they bought more liquor, they consumed more liquor throughout the course of the afternoon, and they went to the pool and kept drinking. By the late afternoon, everybody passes out. Everybody's asleep. And you're going to hear that Milan, she did go to her room. She closed the door. She locked it. You're going to hear that Lincoln absolutely knocked on her door, said, Milan, Milan. You're going to hear from her that she didn't think this was scary, that she didn't think that he was trying to force his way in for any nefarious purpose. She thought it was funny. She laughed at it. You're going to hear a recording of her laughing at it. It wasn't this sinister thing that the state made it sound like. Not at all. And when you hear her testify, I want you to listen to that. So Lincoln's looking for a place to lay down, and he lays down in their bed. You may think that's a little weird, but in the context of their relationship, it wasn't. And you're going to hear that on a prior occasion, Nick, the complainant's boyfriend, laid down with Lincoln and his significant other in their bed after they had been drinking at a party. So you're going to hear that in the course of their relationship, Lincoln and Nick's friendship, that wasn't a big deal. It wasn't unprecedented. It wasn't something that had never happened. That when they were drinking, even when they were with their significant others, that had happened before. It wasn't a weird thing. And if nothing, if the complainant that day had not made any allegations, they wouldn't have thought a thing about it. That's what you'll hear. What you didn't hear in the prosecutor's opening statement is that the complainant told the police that day that she'd been rubbing her butt up against Lincoln's groin in the moments before she says the sexual assault happened. That she had kind of been coming out of her sleep and recalls doing that. That's what you didn't hear. You also didn't hear is that she tells the police that she thought it was Nick that was in bed, and that she thought that's who she was nuzzling up against. What you'll hear is that they both came out of this sleep, Lincoln and Carissa, about the same time. Lincoln realizing what Carissa's doing to him, and Carissa kind of realizing that it's Lincoln, not Nick, about the same time. And you're going to hear that when they wake up, it's Lincoln, not the complainant, that says, get off me. Actually, really what he says is, get the fuck off me. That's what you'll hear. He says immediately when she figures out, when both of them figure out what's going on. That's what you'll hear. That's what happened. And given the situation, he leaves, understandably. He gets his stuff and he leaves. And you're going to hear that Nick calls him and says, hey, what happened? And you're going to hear about that conversation. You're going to hear about some text messages that were sent. And Nick is going to go back to Milan and to the complainant, Carissa, and say, you know what? He confessed. He admitted it. But what you'll hear from the witness stand is that Lincoln never said anything approaching that he heard what he wanted to hear. And again, he's trying to be a good boyfriend. He's trying to be supportive of Carissa. He's trying to be, trying to believe what she's saying. But you're going to hear that when he's on the witness stand and when he's forced to testify honestly, he's going to say, you know what? He never did say that he sexually assaulted her. He never even said that they had sex, that there was any penetration at all. That's what you'll hear from that witness stand, and I want you to pay attention when he testifies and when we ask him about the statements that were made during that drive home. Now, what you will hear is that Lincoln said a word that you will find distasteful, and he called Carissa a slut. Now, in the court of public opinion, is he guilty of being a jerk for using that word? Absolutely. Yes, he is. But in a court of law, we don't convict somebody because we find their conduct distasteful. And we don't convict an innocent person because we find a word that they use to be disgusting or repulsive. In this court of law, we convict people when there is proof, powerful proof supporting proof beyond a reasonable doubt. And this table won't be able to bring you that. Just plain and simple. Folks, you won't hear any statements from this witness stand. You won't hear any independent evidence that there was ever even penetration at all, that there was any sexual contact at all, because there wasn't. Just plain and simple. But what did Carissa understand when she went to the hospital? That Nick had come back to her and said, yeah, he confessed to it. And so she's got Nick and Milan both telling her, yeah, he confessed to it. He said that he sexually assaulted you. And that was her understanding when she goes to the hospital that day. Now, of course, it didn't happen. He never said those things, but that's what Nick heard. And that's what he told Carissa, the complainant, when she went to the hospital that day. That was her understanding. And when she's got her friends telling her she's been raped, that's what she believes. And the more you hear something, the more you believe it. And so she goes to the hospital, and there's an off-duty officer there. And so she has to tell him, what happened? Why are you here? Well, I've been raped, and the guy admitted to it. So he calls over a nurse. And now she has to tell the nurse what happened. And so she says, yeah, I was raped, and he admitted to it. And right there, she had the opportunity. She had the opportunity to do a safe kit, a rape kit. She doesn't do it. She doesn't do it. She's right there. She's right there with a professional nurse who's trained to do these, which is a simple DNA swab, could have confirmed, could have proved, or disproved that any penetration happened. And she chose not to do one. Why? Why, having gone all the way to the hospital, having a nurse in the room that could have done it in seconds, and she chose not to do it because she knew what it would prove or disprove happened. That's what you'll hear from this witness stand. That's what you'll hear throughout the course of this trial. And the fact is, this game will present you with zero independent evidence that any penetration happened, that there was any sexual act at all, because it didn't. Because it didn't. The only evidence that you'll have is the alcohol soaked recollections of people from an event that happened 5 years ago. That's what you'll have. Because there is no DNA. And she made that choice. And after she leaves the hospital, is she so terrified of what Lincoln did to her that day that she calls to check up with the San Marcos Police Department? Hey, have you arrested the guy that raped me? How is that investigation going? No. How about the next week? No. How about the next month? No. 4 months later, she never calls the San Marcos Police Department to check in on how the investigation's going, if they caught the perpetrator. And the detectives never pick it up. They don't do anything on this case for 4 months. It sits on somebody's desk for 4 months and nothing gets done. When Detective Davidson, who investigates this case, and I'll wrap that in quotes, when he investigates this case, what does he do? Does he bring witnesses into his office, interview them in person? Does he go collect evidence? Does he go and talk with the nurse in the emergency room? Does he go even watch the video that Sergeant Sparenberg collected at the hospital? No, he does none of those things. He literally phones it in from his desk. He calls people on the phone, and that's it. That's what you'll hear his investigation consisted of. Now, folks, Carissa had a choice. She had a choice to provide you with the evidence you need to figure out, did this happen or not? She had a choice to provide you evidence that would prove or disprove her allegations in this case. She made a choice. The San Marcos Police Department had a choice to thoroughly investigate this case, to talk with witnesses, to collect evidence, or to sit on their hands and not do anything for 4 months. Now, they made those choices. You didn't make those choices. But while those weren't your choices, they are now your problem. Because now you have a choice. And that is, do you convict an innocent person based on a shoddy investigation that was conducted months later, or do you hold the state to their burden? Do you demand the kind of powerful, convincing evidence that we talked about this morning in jury selection? The evidence that you would expect to see if your loved one was charged, was accused of an offense. What would you demand to see? That is now the choice that you have. And we are going to ask you to make the right choice, to make the right decision, and that is to hold the state to their burden, to demand that evidence. Now, they won't be able to produce it, and when they can't, we will ask you to return the only appropriate verdict, and that is not guilty.
State, please call your first witness.
Thank you, Your Honor. State call is Sergeant Andrew Sparenberg.
Please raise your right hand. You swear to tell the whole truth, tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Yes, sir.
Please have a seat. If you would, adjust yourself close to that microphone, about a fist away. And it will move up and down so it's close for you and the court reporter can hear everything. If you would, please tell us your name and spell it for the court reporter.
My name is Andrew Sparenberg. Andrew is Andrew. Sparenberg, Sparenberg.
State, you may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Okay, it's good afternoon at this point. How are you currently employed?
I'm a sergeant at the San Marcos Police Department.
Okay, and in order to be employed by the San Marcos Police Department as a police officer, do you have to be a certified police officer?
Yes, you do.
Okay, when did you become a certified police officer?
I completed the certification in 2008.
Okay, and are there different levels of certification?
There are,
What level do you hold?
I am a master police officer.
What do you have to do to become a master police officer?
I believe that you have to at least 7 years. You're gonna have to do thousands of hours of training to go through the other levels. You can do less years if you have more education, which is what I'm.
Is there more education?
Yes,
What's your educational background?
I have both a bachelor's and a master's degree from the local university in criminal justice.
Okay. You did both a bachelor's and master's in criminal justice.
Correct.
Okay. And when did you get those degrees?
I believe the bachelor's was 2003 and the master's was 2005.
And then did you go straight into law enforcement?
I was still doing some iron working for another year or two after that.
Okay. And how do you start a career as a police officer?
Well, it varies by agency. This particular agency, San Marcos, will pay you while you go to the academy. So you begin by taking a civil service exam at an agency like this and score well enough on that and go through the other tests, psychological and all those things. To be hired. If you're already a certified police officer, you go into the field training. If you are not, you go to the academy first, like I did.
Okay. And so SMPD actually paid you to go to the academy.
They did.
Okay. What year was that?
That began in 07.
Okay. And what does the academy entail? What do you learn?
That's a lot. The academy is a full-time job, 5 days a week, 8 to 5. You do everything police related. You're going to learn your shooting, handcuffing techniques, defensive tactics, investigations of all sorts, including PWI investigations, assault, sexual assault, family violence. There's a section on law, of course. More sections than I can recall off the top of my head right now.
Okay. Is part of your training about interacting with people?
Yes, and one of those was a courtroom testimony. Section as well, I guess.
Why is it important to train law enforcement to interact with people?
Well, everything we do is interacting with people, and we have to be able to do it well. You've got to be able to figure out what people really mean, whether they're saying one thing or another. Determine what somebody is trying to tell you or what's going on in a certain situation. And I mean, interacting with people is almost everything to a police officer.
Okay. And do you have ongoing education requirements to maintain your peace officer license?
I do. The minimum is, I believe, 40 Texas state license people hours per 2 years, which at SMPD we find that to be a very low minimum, so we do a lot more than that.
Okay. And what kind of topics typically is your continuing education in?
It will typically be something that you've done at the academy or related. Sometimes it may be child abuse, it may be those 40 hours can include even shooting or driving. They can be other investigations, crime scenes, anything related to what we do.
Okay. Have you had any of your training, either originally in the academy, or since then in your ongoing education, had courses regarding sexual assault investigations?
I have, yes.
Could you tell us about that?
I don't recall exact course numbers or titles, but I've had multiple investigation classes in general, which include the sexual assault investigations. Some of which is interviewing classes and also in the same exam process.
So once again, interacting with people and then dealing with evidence.
Correct.
Okay. What different roles have you held with SMPD?
So in the beginning, I was a cadet, which is when I was going to the academy for that half a year. After that, becoming a licensed peace officer, you become what we call a PPO or probationary police officer. You're going to spend another at least 4 months as a probationary police officer where you're assigned to a field training officer, and he will go everywhere with you while you do cop stuff and learn from him until you show that you're able to do it well enough to be on your own, at which point you become a non-probationary police officer. Which I was from sometime in 2008 until 2015, when I promoted to corporal. And I'm gonna say 3 years after that, more or less, promoted to sergeant. My corporal is also a supervisor position. Aside from that, I spent half a year in working in evidence. And I spent another half a year working in radio and dispatch. I was a field training officer for 6.5 years, and I trained the new guys in full practicals, which is part of our mini academy, for about 8.5 years.
All right. And so what is your current assignment or duties or?
Currently, I'm the senior patrol sergeant, so I get to work in the daytime now. And I supervise 1 corporal and 9 officers on a daily basis, from 6 in the morning to 5 or 6 in the afternoon, which is everything any supervisor or any other job does. Plus, reviewing videos and use of force and anything else.
Okay, and so is it fair to say the majority of your experience, whether first as just a regular police officer and now through leadership positions, you've been on patrol?
I've been on patrol the entire time except for those stints in evidence and dispatch.
Okay, and typically, what sort of things is a patrol officer doing?
That's also a lot. Obviously patrolling, but being present in the community, there is traffic enforcement, they're responding to calls. For the most part of this city now, with the size of our department, the size of the city, they're responding to calls. And it runs from everything. I paid for my roof and the guy didn't build it, to assaults, sexual assaults, any other disturbance, vandalism, riot reports, and all those things.
As a sergeant, do you typically take or respond to calls and take reports?
No,
Okay, at that point you said you're more approving other people's reports.
or rejecting for direction.
Okay. So were you working with SMPD in September of 2019?
I was.
And do you recall that time what your, I guess, I'm sorry, your title was?
That was a sergeant.
You were a sergeant. Did you have an occasion to actually take a report?
I did.
And how many reports have you personally taken as a sergeant?
Primary reports, I did 1.
Is that this case we're here talking about?
It is.
So do you remember it fairly well because of that?
Yes.
Okay. Where were you?
I was at the local hospital. I believe at the time it was not called CSR yet. I was there in the roots.
I guess back then we would call it CTMC.
CGMC, I believe it was.
Okay, and now we're Christus, is that right?
Correct.
Okay. And what were you doing there?
I was checking in on one of the officers on my shift. He was a field training officer and he had a trainee with him and they were doing a blood draw and UWI.
Okay, and so just as a supervisor, you check in and make sure things are going well.
If I have the ability to go out to some of the scenes, I will go out and see what's going on and observe.
Okay, so while you were doing that, did something, I guess, catch your attention?
Yes, to start with or set that scene, the ER was over full at the emergency room that is, so all the rooms were full and they have a very small waiting room. And so inside that waiting room was where my officer, his trainee had their suspect, and the blood draw was done there. And then there were 2 young ladies and a young man in the other corner. And the room was small, perhaps the size of the jury box.
Okay, and so is it normal that a blood draw would be done in that room?
Relatively speaking, yes.
Okay.
They like to not take up a room because it's maybe 15-20 minutes usually.
Okay, and so, but in this small space, then you have your situation you're dealing with, plus unrelated people waiting for a number of things.
Correct.
They aren't necessarily there waiting for law enforcement.
Correct.
Okay, and so, how did you first notice these other young people that you described?
Well, the very first thing is this, we're in a very small room and they're also there in the corner. And one of the young ladies was crying. They were talking amongst each other.
Okay, do you recall what time it was?
Off the top of my head, no, but referring to my report, it would be about 11:36 p.m.
11:36 p.m. And is that the copy of your report that you have up there with you?
That's correct.
And that report you wrote close in time to the events back in September of 2019?
Yes, it would have been probably that next day.
Okay. You said one of the people were crying. Can you describe what that person looked like?
Caucasian female. Her hair was kind of tied up, blonde, dirty blonde hair.
And did you ultimately speak to that person?
I did.
Okay. What was her name?
Her name was Carissa Ellis.
Okay. And let me just back up to you had a body cam on that night, is that right?
I did.
Okay, and have you had an opportunity to review that in your preparation report?
I did.
And have you noticed, is there a time discrepancy on your body cam, if you recall?
I don't recall.
Okay, is it common sometimes for body cams to be set to, I say Greenwich Mean Time, but I think you guys say Zulu time?
They can be, and I believe when ours were newer, they may have been for a while.
And what does that mean? Like, why does that happen?
I'm not sure exactly why, except for that's sort of the global standard, if you want to use a standard time all the way around the world.
Okay, and so we have to adjust for our central time zone.
That is possible.
Okay, but in your report, you notate it as the current time based on what time it actually was, not what what your body cam said.
Correct. I also will have used our computer-aided dispatch system to locate that time.
Okay. And you said Krista was crying, they were kind of talking to each other. Did you hear anything specific that they were whispering or saying to each other?
Not to begin with, when we began to leave, the officers and I heard them somewhat saying.
Objection, Your Honor. Hearsay.
Sustained.
Your Honor, may I respond?
You may.
We're not offering it for the truth of the matter asserted, but to show what he did next.
Sustained.
Okay, well, what did you do then at that point?
I approached the three individuals and asked them what was going on.
Okay, would you describe them as kind of flagging you down?
I believe they wanted to. I think they were the other two were trying to encourage the young lady.
Objection, speculation.
Overruled.
Has this happened before that you kind of stumbled into a situation where people need to make a report?
Absolutely.
Is it common?
Yes, you go places and people will just, hey, I'm going to tell you about this.
Have you also had situations like this where someone maybe isn't sure if they want to make a report?
Absolutely.
Okay, so what did you do? You said you kind of said, hi, what's going on? Did they then readily talk to you?
Yes,
Okay. May I first witness, Your Honor?
Okay.
Let me show you what I've marked as states 1. Do you recognize this?
yes, I recognize them in the location.
Okay, and these are the 3 young people that you encountered at the hospital.
Correct.
Is this a fair and accurate representation of how they looked that night?
Yes.
This time, Your Honor, I'd offer states 1, tender to defense counsel.
No objection.
State Exhibit 1 is admitted.
Thank you. And may I publish?
You may.
And which is the one you described as Krista who was crying?
That's the female in the middle.
Okay, with kind of a white square with a picture on her shirt.
Yes.
All right. And so let me back up a little bit to your training. Through the academy, through your ongoing training, through your years on patrol, do you have experience dealing with intoxicated individuals?
Very much.
Okay, would you say that is a lot of what patrol officers deal with?
It is, especially on nights. I was on nights for more than 12 years.
Okay, so would you say you are actually trained to recognize signs of intoxication?
I am.
Okay, and also then to record those signs of intoxication in any report you might write.
Correct.
Okay, when you encountered these 3 people, did you detect any signs of intoxication?
They did not appear intoxicated.
Okay, did they have any problems standing or moving?
No.
Did they have any issues communicating with you?
No.
Okay, did they smell like alcohol?
No.
If they had,
you would potentially made a note of that in your report.
It will be noted it's going to be something that the detective is going to wonder about, given your interaction. You
Okay.
want to know, do you think they were intoxicated when they told you X, Y, and Z?
Okay, because that can affect somebody's ability to tell you what happened.
Most certainly.
Okay, and so at the time that you encountered them, we're saying 11:36 p.m. As a trained and experienced officer, you did not believe them to be intoxicated,
I did not.
and that goes for all three of them.
Correct.
Okay. And did you speak to all three of them?
I did
Okay, do you do that together or separately?
separately.
And why is that?
Cross contamination for the most part is what's very important if you're talking to one person. I mean, even if you're investigating a crash. And I have one person tell me what they saw in front of another person, that will possibly influence the other person. So you want to do those interviews separate and isolated.
Okay, who did you talk to first?
First, I talked to Carissa.
Okay, what was her demeanor?
It varied. She kind of seemed to be a little bit of shock or disbelief.
Okay, at points did she use humor?
She did.
Okay, and I guess with your training experience, did that mean anything to you?
If she was experiencing an event of one sort or another that put her on a bit of an emotional roller coaster, I would say she went from angry to a joke, and then, questioning, just obviously experiencing some kind of event that was serious.
Okay. Did she tell you why she was there at the hospital? Without getting into the words, she said,
She did.
okay. Did you offer for her to do a SANE exam?
I did.
And can you tell them just briefly, what is a SANE exam?
The same exam is basically a sexual assault exam. They will examine the person, male or female, to determine one, whether intercourse occurred or some other kind of sexual activity, and two, there may be a DNA component that will help them determine who it was with if they don't know.
Okay. Did she want to get one of those?
She did not.
Okay. Was she pretty adamant about that?
Yes,
Okay. In your experience, would you find that common?
yes,
Okay. Would you say that victims of sexual assault act all sorts of different ways?
correct.
Okay. And have you had victims who did want the same kit done?
Yes, I have.
Okay. And the ones who didn't want it done, do you try and convince them to do that?
No, it's a very private, personal thing, decision. Obviously, they're going to be intrusive, physically and emotionally, I'm sure.
Okay. And even though they can produce evidence, would you ever force a victim of sexual assault to have one?
No,
Did you obtain statements from Carissa that night?
I did.
Okay, both written and recorded on your body cam?
Correct, verbal on the body cam and the written form.
Were you given the name of the person she was accusing of sexually assaulting her?
I was.
Okay, what was that name?
That name, I believe she only gave me Lincoln, the first name, and during my investigation, I obtained the last name of Pearson.
Okay. Do you remember who you got the last name from?
I believe that would be from Mr. Smith.
Okay. And was it your understanding that that's Nicholas Smith?
Correct,
Okay. Was it your understanding that he actually knew Lincoln Pearson?
very well.
Okay. Were you able to ascertain if this occurred in Hayes County?
I was.
Okay. Where did it take place?
The apartment's called the Retreat Apartments. They're at 512 Craddock. So the corner of Craddock and Old Ranch Road 12.
And is that in San Marcos?
It is.
And that's in Hayes County, Texas.
Correct.
Thank you. Was Krista able to give you a description of what happened?
Yes.
Okay. Did she give you any indication she had initiated this encounter?
Objection, hearsay.
Overruled.
You may answer.
She did not.
And what you described earlier as an emotional roller coaster, did that continue throughout your interaction with her?
It did. Yes.
Who did you speak with next?
The next person I spoke with was Nicholas Smith.
And what was his demeanor?
Disbelief, perhaps, that everything was going on, but he was relatively calm. He was not happy. Quite the opposite.
Okay. And were you able to determine what his relationship was to Carissa?
I was.
And what was that?
Objection, hearsay.
Your Honor, as part of his investigation, to identify the nature and relationship of the parties to each other, not asking for what he was told.
It's an out-of-court statement being offered for the truth of the matter asserted. It's hearsay, Your Honor.
I think the question
Question so far is just, was he able to? Is that right?
I asked, was he able to ascertain and then asked what was that relationship?
And what was that relationship?
Okay,
Sustained.
And did he give you a statement?
He did.
Did he seem supportive of Carissa?
Objection, speculation.
Your Honor, those training experience, the demeanor he observed.
Sustained.
Sustained.
Was Nick able to give you a phone number for the defendant?
Yes, he was.
Okay, what was that phone number?
I will have to look at some of our reports. And it may have only been in the data section of the report.
Is that something that you enter as well?
Right.
Like, push this on?
Okay.
Show you these 3 pages. Are these the data portion of the report that you're referring to?
Yes, it's supposed to be a printout of our whole system, CIS, the case report.
Okay. So what was that phone number that you got for the defendant?
The phone number I see here is 512-539-7119.
Okay. And did you learn at that time that there were some text messages between the defendant and Nicholas Smith?
I did,
Okay, did you ask Nick to send those to you?
I did,
And did he in fact send those to you?
yes.
Okay. What do you do with, when you get something like that, what do you do with it?
We have a program that's called QTEL. That's probably irrelevant, but it's a site that we use that we upload evidence to. And so we would take those digital images and upload them into that evidence program.
Okay. I put you here.
You may.
All right, let me show you what I've marked as states two. So these appear to be the text messages that Nick sent you that were between Nicholas Smith and the defendant in Pearson.
Yes,
That you uploaded to the evidence system.
I did.
All right. Who did you speak with next?
Next, I spoke with Milan Marcantel.
Okay, so if you refer back to your report. If you review your report again, was Milan at the hospital or was it somebody different?
It was somebody different.
Who was that?
That was Rebecca Brown.
Okay, so they told you about Milan, but you didn't actually meet her that night.
Correct.
Okay. And so what was Rebecca Brown's demeanor?
She was upset for her friend, anxious.
Okay. And did she also give you a statement about her involvement in what happened?
She did.
Okay. Was anybody else there with them?
It was just the 3 of them.
But you were given the name Milan. Were you given other people who may have information about the case?
I was.
And what do you do with those names?
I added them into the report, particularly in that data section as witnesses. So that an investigator can find them at a later date.
Okay. And so as a patrol officer, when you take a report on a case like this, you don't see it through to the end.
Correct. My job is the preliminary if I was an officer, my preliminary, report would be more or less the totality of what I would do. Complete that report, get supervisor approval, and at that point, it is passed back to the criminal investigation division. At which point it's reviewed by one of those supervisors, and they then decide to put it in the, we're investigating this now or we're not at this time.
But you have no control over that,
Correct.
okay? So that night, could you have gone to that apartment and collected evidence?
I could have,
Did you?
No.
Why not?
there would be no physical evidence that would be relevant to the question of the case.
Okay, and what did you base that conclusion on?
Having seen the text messages and hearing from Carissa, I knew that both Carissa and Mr. Pearson said that sex occurred in the bed. So physical evidence would only show whether they were in the bed and possibly whether sex occurred. Both parties said that happened.
Okay, and so in these situations, even knowing that both parties are saying this occurred, is it possible you would go and collect, say, that those sheets and get no evidence from it?
It is also possible.
Okay, and in a situation like this, we're talking about sexual assault. If there was no ejaculation, would you expect to find evidence of sex?
Not necessarily.
Was there any other investigation that you could have done that night?
I suppose if I really, at the time, I would have tried to find the other witnesses.
Okay. But at that point, would that have really been your job?
No,
Okay. That night at the hospital, I think you said it was pretty busy. They were kind of on overflow mode. Is that, am I summarizing correct? Okay. When a hospital gets busy, does that typically mean there's going to be delays?
correct.
Okay. And so as law enforcement coming in and say a DWI blood draw, do you guys kind of get bumped to the front of the line?
We can, especially some of them are someone who's going to jail if they've been in a crash. And just because they've been in a crash, they have to be cleared. So the doctors like to move us up there, clear that person, get them out. As opposed to people who need treatment ongoing.
And if someone had come in and they're not bleeding and they can breathe and there's nothing immediately wrong with them, is it possible on a night like this, they would sit and wait a long time?
Absolutely.
After you turned in your report that night, did you have anything further to do with the investigation of this case?
No.
That's what was trying.
All right, we take a break mid-afternoon, so we'll take this one now before the cross-examination begins. Only about 10 minutes. So as soon as y'all are done, please let Donkey know and we'll get right back in here and get to the cross-examination of the officer. Remember my instructions, don't talk about this case with anyone, don't text or tweet about it, don't talk about it.
All rise for the jury.
Yes.